Please welcome back Team M.
Tim's still alcoholic. I know it shows a lack of imagination, the fact we keep using the Serenity Prayer, but at the board meetings, the General Service Board of AA in Great Britain, they just keep using the Serenity Prayer. At the subcommittee meetings, we still use the Serenity Prayer. I don't seem to have worn it out, so there we go. So I'm going to speed up with some more questions. I think someone's trapped out there. Right, so I'm going to look at the next section to look at is some questions about the home group. And one person had a question about being in I think it's a women's group. I mean, I've got experience of gay and lesbian groups in London. I have experience of men's groups. I obviously don't have experience of women's groups yet. Science does allow for change. And this person was saying the group isn't functioning so well. She said, how might the suggested structure of a properly functioning group be introduced in a non-confrontational way? When I join a home group and I think it needs to be different to how it is currently operating, this is someone else's question, is it wrong to try and coerce the group to change? I mean, I think the answer is in the question, isn't it? Coerce. I think we learnt in step 6 that's one of the naughty words, isn't it? We're not supposed to. And I'll just read the other home group questions as well and see if they get covered one way or another. Does your group have an internet presence? How have you handled a group situation, committee meeting, where one or more people are being disruptive? Was it effective? And have you ever had to address a situation where a group member's behaviour is reported as predatory by vulnerable members of the group? What did you do? Was it effective? Are these questions which are relevant in Sydney in the 21st century? Okay. I've never successfully changed a group, so I don't try. What I do, after years of militantly trying to spatula in the traditions and the concepts into groups which did not want them and weren't interested in them, I decided instead to find a set of people who thought the same as I did, and we set up our own group. So we just leave them be and go, we just do our own thing over here, they do their thing over there. And one of the big lessons I've learned in Tradition 1 is for AA to have unity, it must not impose uniformity. And for my group to have unity, we must not impose uniformity. I know of groups in the UK where there's a dress code, where you have to dress a certain way, and if you wear the wrong type of trousers, the GSR will sidle up to you and tell you in no uncertain terms that you are not willing enough to be a group member. Now, I wouldn't do that in my group, but they're completely at liberty to do it because no one is forcing anyone to go to that particular group in that city. There are loads of other groups, and that group is very structured and helps people that can't get sober anywhere else. It's fine. I don't have to fight that. I don't have to get in there and fight that. In my group, which is very structured in a sense, although the sharing, I was at some meetings in Queensland where the chairperson picks who's going to share. In London, that would not fly. People just jump in. There isn't even hands raised. People just jump in. But the group manages to regulate itself. We've got a strong group conscience which says we want to carry a message, and so we lead by example rather than leading by mandate. We don't tell people what to do. But I've caused so much trouble in AA over the years trying to get in to groups which are slack and trying to tighten them up. And I was loathed because of it, and with my little righteous hat on. I did no good at all. But since we've decided to just do what we do in our corner, we built up a large group. There is one point, though, in Bill W.'s essays on the 12 concepts. So, for anyone who's new, the steps, this is my take on it. The steps are there to get my relationship with myself and my higher power right. And there's a little bit about relationships with other people. The traditions allow me to operate in a group with other people without anyone pushing each other downstairs or throttling each other. And the concepts are a structure for getting stuff done, again, with no one needing to be injured in the process. There's a line in the concepts about, I think it's possibly in the leadership essay, about how progress in AA is made through a sequence of compromises. So I have seen examples of friends of mine that have affected positive change in groups, but it's by its tiny little steps, one step at a time, and the result is a compromise, and after 100 compromises, the group is somewhere completely different 10 years later. But I've got to respect the group conscience. So I have lots of ideas in my home group. Other people have lots of ideas. Some ideas are a disaster. We had an idea I had the idea a few years ago of having a unity circle where at the end, rather than just sitting in the chairs and saying Serenity Prayer, we would form a circle and just stand in silence for a couple of minutes and then go and do what we would do otherwise. And everyone hated it. People were just incredibly uncomfortable. I'd seen it work in America somewhere and it just didn't work. But my job, if I have an idea for a group, is to drop the idea into the group conscience meeting, explain it, and then keep my big, fat mouth shut. If the idea is good, it will get taken up. It doesn't need me to sell it. It doesn't need me to convince anyone. It doesn't need me to persuade anyone. All I have to do is introduce the idea and let the group conscience handle it. And one of the reasons my group, I touch wood so far, has functioned very well is I don't believe there are any backroom dealings. Lots of groups have WhatsApp groups in which they try to transact group business on WhatsApp, where not everyone has WhatsApp, and not everyone who goes to the group has WhatsApp. Not everyone is able to track the hundreds of messages a day. And people, I don't know about you, but my experience of people on electronic media is they behave in a way that they wouldn't behave face to face. They say things they would not dare say to the person, to their face. And it's outside the group conscience. There's something about getting people in a room together where you have to go and have dinner with each other afterwards. It's another reason why the dinner is important. If you're going to have to sit through dinner, it makes you behave in the group conscience meeting. You really are stuck with these people in the lifeboat. But that's where the business gets transacted. It's fine to discuss something outside. Of course, you run through ideas with friends, the pros and the cons. But it gets transacted in the group. We are very keen to protect vulnerable people in our group. And we keep a very, very close eye on... so far, all of the predatory people have been men. So there we go. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. But we listen very carefully if there is a complaint, and we watch very carefully what's going on. And the women look after the newcomer women. The men deal with the predatory men. And it starts with a very gentle conversation where I'll go to someone and say, there have been a couple of complaints that you've got a bit too close to some of the newcomer women. I'm not going to judge the situation. I don't want to know. I'm not going to adjudicate this. This is not a kangaroo court. We're not going to put you up in front for trial in the group conscience. But just so you know, those complaints have been made. I don't know if they're true or not, but be aware that if it happens again, this could escalate. So it gives someone, we do this in a way that no one else knows it's being done, so that face is saved, so that the person can quietly rectify the behaviour and remain a member of the group. That we don't escalate to a point of a group conscience meeting about someone's behaviour unless it's absolutely necessary, and it's never needed to get that far. If someone won't stay away from the women, we physically separate them, and we've had to call the police when they get nasty. We're not and we've had to exclude one person from the group. We're not excluding them from AA. They're still allowed to be an AA member. But if you're going to come in and disrupt our group and act as a threat towards people in there, we're not going to put up with that, because the group welfare comes first. And what we've said to them is, if you want, we're happy to help you through the steps. We're happy to help you through all of the programme. Let's go and talk about recovery. If you want us to take you to a men's meeting, we'll take you to a men's meeting. It's one of the good reasons for having men's meetings, is there's some way you can you can take these people where they won't harm anyone. So there are ways of dealing with things without causing a huge kerfuffle, and where you aren't shaming someone more than is strictly necessary to get the job done of protecting the people that need to be protected. As I'm gay, I end up sponsoring sponsored a lot of women over the years, and I've sponsored women who've worked as sex workers, and the stories are just extraordinary. And I can understand very much why women's groups are necessary from the perspective of those people, and how vulnerable a lot of the people that come into AA, no matter how they front up, there's a vulnerability there. And we need to look after those people. Right, how much of a meeting, this is the section on meetings, how much of a meeting needs to be focused on identification? I need to share about my day and how I'm going, but they have a topic at the meeting and there's a timer. Who do I talk to so that I can have the time I need? And I love how blunt, the British would never be so blunt with as the next question. Is the newcomer really the most important person in the room? And what the hell does that mean anyway? Part of the reason I did a bit of a skit at the beginning about my history was so that you know I'm just an ordinary human being who happens to be in AA. There's a danger with pedestals and microphones and recording that a distance is created, and I don't want that. This is why I like to illustrate the big book stuff with stories about my life, and that's the one thing. There's a line in, no idea where my big book is now. If someone could grab a big book, it would be really helpful. Something in Dr. Bob's Nightmare, I think it's on the penultimate page of Dr. Bob's Nightmare, that the reason he connected with Bill was because Bill knew what he was talking about with alcoholism from his own experience, and not because he'd read it in a book. And that was what got me in AA. I heard my own story told back to me so many times that I realised I wasn't different, thank you, I wasn't different from you, so if it worked for you, it would work for me. So it's key to step 2. But if I go to a meeting and I just share my problem without sharing a solution, I'm probably helping me a little bit, but just even hearing myself articulate the problem helps me to achieve clarity. There's a huge value to that, but it may not be helping anyone else. If I share about the problem and the actions I'm taking in AA and the benefit I'm getting from that, then I'm helping everyone in the room because it's potentially useful. And the AA meeting is the 1 hour, my hour-long home group is the 1 hour in the week where a gift can be given by me to 80 people in the room. A gift can be given by everyone who shares to 80 people in the room. So the aim is to maximise the impact of that gift. And that's what binds the people together in the room. I've got 115 other waking hours to yak until I'm hoarse. And of course, I need to talk and talk and talk. I talk to my best friend every day. I have done for years and years and years, sometimes up to an hour, just to get all of the just to narrate the course of the day, just to get all of the stuff out, to talk it through. But the meeting is not the place I do that, because there is a higher calling for me when I go to a meeting. I need to connect by showing you how AA has helped me. That's what the whole thing is about. And also with the bell, we have a bell at my home group. At 3 minutes, the bell goes and you're encouraged to wind up your sharing. And at the end, we have a 10-minute section with quick fire, 1 minute sharing, 1 minute from 10 people. So loads of people get the chance to contribute. So it's no good saying, what about me? What about everyone? How do we get everyone to participate in this? Lovely. Step 2. What if I have... Does anyone have any questions on step 1? There were no questions on step 1. Does anyone have one? There's no such thing as a stupid question. There's just sometimes a stupid speaker. No questions. What if I have trouble with the God word because of my childhood? Can we just have a show of hands? Who had trouble with the word God when they got to AA because of their childhood? Okay, there we go. So that's an awful lot of people. I was an atheist when I got to AA. I was a communist when I got to AA. And honestly, my experience is, I don't know how common it is, I had to bypass the intellectual debate. What I needed to do was to have an experience of some power in the universe. And how I conceived of that was neither here nor there. So I know how to boil water in a kettle, because I know where the switch is and I know how a kettle works. But my knowledge of physics is weak. And even if you don't believe the kettle will work, and you don't believe in physics, if you turn the kettle on, it will boil the water. So, I could talk for a long time. There are technical reasons why people have a problem with the very notion of God, let alone the word. But I don't think this is the right place for that discussion. That's something we can come for dinner afterwards. We can talk about that. It's fascinating. But what matters is the role of the difficulty with God in step 2. My experience of how I formed a relationship with a power greater than myself is that the point of that relationship was to move me from A to B. A being separated, distraught, desperate about to drink, to being just about comfortable enough to stay sober for another day. I did not have the power to stay sober, left to my own devices. And all I was asked to believe in was that that power could be acquired by me. I could have the power to stay sober today. Where that power came from, just like the electricity, who knows what the power station looks like? I don't need to understand what the power station looks like. I just need to access the power. And that power was self-evident in AA. This was a bunch of people who have accessed the power, let alone to run their lives, to not drink today. Therefore, there is a power greater than the individuals. We've just proved there is a power greater than ourselves. How we conceive of that, completely irrelevant. It can be an interesting topic later on. So I would just bypass it and come back to it later. And honestly, the experience of it blows out of the water any notions about what the higher power might be. So my advice to anyone, in as far as we're able to give advice, is to get on with the rest of the steps, trusting that the program will work, staying sober one day at a time with the help of your sponsor and your friends and your home group. And whatever power is available in the universe will reveal itself towards you. Let's have a look. There was a step 1 question, actually. And there's one on sponsorship I'm going to cover. Oh, surrendering. The surrendering. What or how does surrendering look to you? It's where your sponsor suggests a course of action and the sky turns black and you can't face it, but there is no way back, so you do it anyway. It's the shortest answer of the day. How do you deal with the shame and guilt that surrounds addiction? My friend Tom says you can't be guilty and powerless at the same time. So when I finally realised that when I was drinking, it was not because I was doing it on purpose. I was yielding to an impulse which was beyond my control. And then the amount that I was drinking was because of the way my body was reacting, and the stuff that I did then was because I was drunk. And because demons which I couldn't deal with were finding expression in my behaviour when I was drunk. The more I recognised I was powerless, the less guilty that I felt. And it's exactly the same when it comes to forgiving other people. There was a question, I'm going to tie this in. How do you help people who have significant abuse towards them in their step 4? My perception of being in the universe before I was given a program in AA was that I was fighting for my survival. And it might have just been, it could have been in an academic context, it could have been in a work context, it doesn't matter what the situation was. It felt like I would die if I did not get my own way. That if my voice wasn't heard, if I wasn't in the centre of attention, if I didn't get your love, I couldn't go on living for another day. If you rejected me, I couldn't go on living for another day. Everything was at the level of life and death. And when you live like that and you have no idea there is another way to live, like it's as though all of the air on the planet, if you were breathing, you were taking away the air which I needed. If you got any attention, it was taking away the attention that was due to me. And I was barely breaking even being at the centre of, on the pedestal, at the centre of attention. I was just about finding the strength not to commit suicide by having everything focused on me. So as soon as the focus turned away, I didn't know how much longer I had. Everything was life and death, and I was in a competition against the rest of the world to the death. So no wonder I behaved the way I behaved. It's like animals in a cage. And all the people who've ever, in inverted commas, harmed me were doing the same. And in the same way that this is what I learned in my step 4. It says on top of page 67 that maybe these people were sick too. And to me, what that meant was they were driven by emotions and impulses and ideas which they didn't generate themselves, which rose up from within them, and they had no control over, and they had no other option. That was the way to live that they had. And that's what I was like too. They, like us, were spiritually sick. If I could have been a better person, I would have been a better person. And if you want proof for yourself, the guilt and the shame prove it. Because the guilt and the shame say that behaviour that I've been up to is not who I really am. If it was who you really were, you wouldn't care. The fact that I cared, the fact that I felt guilty and shameful for everything I'd done, meant that it wasn't who I really am, wasn't who I really was, because I had a notion of a me which was like a memory of a me which was entirely different, which was loving. That was how I knew it was wrong. It wasn't just fear of retribution, fear of retaliation, because that's a cold sense of guilt. That's just being frightened you're going to get caught but laughing behind your hand. That's not guilt or shame, that's something else. It's calculation. But guilt or shame tells me that that's not who I really am. And I need to extend that to other people. And the other thing as well, the curious thing is, of all of the things that have ever happened to me, none of them are happening right now. Whatever it is gone. And the only thing that can hurt me now is the story I'm now telling myself about the thing that happened, which is usually the story I told myself at the time, which I retold again and again and again and again and again. And my natural reaction to anything bad happening to me was, I must be a terrible person or this wouldn't be happening. That was below the level of consciousness, but that was my interpretation. If I suffered, clearly there was a reason why, and it's because I deserved it. And having that tape rewired and being told that that's just a tape, that's just bad software that's been loaded onto your system, reinterpreting those events as being events that I witnessed. So I was on the receiving end of various forms of abuse as a child. That's how I forgave, by recognizing that my spirit, which is who I really am, was never harmed by any of those things, remained intact throughout the whole thing, and was found again by doing the steps and by hearing kids of 18, 19, 20, 21 do their step fives with me, full of guilt and shame and remorse for things that they had done, for things which had been done to them, and looking at their screwed up faces of terror and pain and bewilderment and frustration, and me looking at them and thinking, I can't see what's wrong with you. You seem like a lovely person, but you've got all of these narratives about yourself. I'll tell them that. And I say, should we go? My sponsor said to me in my step 5 first step 5 in 1994, got to the end of it, and he said, should we go for a pizza? And I thought, this man wants to spend time with me, having heard everything that I've had to say. People do their step 5 with me, and I go through their step 4 with them. They think I'm going to be shocked, and I'm never shocked. And in that moment, when I see that the other person is okay, that this is a human being that was driven by forces which were stronger than themselves, I realize, oh my God, this is true for me as well. And that's when I forgave myself. And then I could extend that to the people that mistreated me as a child. Does anyone have any questions about forgiveness or dealing with difficult things from the past? Yeah. Sorry, can you a bit louder? Can you tell me more about what not letting it go means? So the question is about forgiving but not letting go. On page 124 of the big book, there is a great line. Showing others who suffer how we were given help is the very thing which makes life seem so worthwhile to us now. Cling to the thought that in God's hands the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it you can avert death and misery for them. I told you in brief about this horrible emotional entanglement I had with someone that was in full-blown relapse about 10 years ago. There were other things in my sobriety, watching my father die of lung cancer whilst I was unable to give up smoking myself. I had a nervous breakdown when I was around 8 years sober in a job which I was ill-equipped for and which was beyond my capabilities. After 20 years sober, there were times when, 24, 25 years sober, there were times when I was waking up in the middle of the night with panic attacks about the environment. And each one of these experiences, which was hellish at the time, when I found a way through it with the program, it becomes an instrument that I can use to help other people. So the experience gets transformed again and again and again. Every time the experience gets used to help someone else, more of the pain goes, and it just turns into something else. So a sea change, I think is the phrase, and it comes from a play where these things in the sea are described as being gradually transformed by the ocean and turning into these beautiful things. And of course these events in my childhood, my brother's suicide, my family's mental illness, none of these things have become beautiful things in the sense of that sea change, but they've been utterly transformed. And I look at I've got a relative who, he's around 30 and he's a nephew of mine, and he's going through an awful time. And his life, he's not an alcoholic, but his life story is matching mine in so many different ways. And each of these horrible experiences is now coming in useful in me trying to help him through those. So maybe I'm not supposed to let go of them in that sense. The reason maybe these things keep coming back to me, they don't haunt me, but they do keep coming back to me. Maybe there's a way this story can be used to help someone else. And my sponsor would say that there is no problem in AA that sponsorship can't solve one way or another. And yeah, you've got to have a sponsor and go through the steps and all of that, but it's being a sponsor to other people, which is not easy. That's where the healing for me happens. The first 9 steps, Bill C. would say that the first 9 steps, they don't transform your life. They raise it to the ground and give you level ground on which you can build something new. They got me to a position, they gave me the tools that I could then carry this message again and again and again. There was another one, there was I had an incident when I was a teenager, when I won't tell you the full details, but I was incredibly cruel to this poor boy who was 14. And I tried again and again and again to trace him since I've been sober. I've never found him. And one day I again did all of the internet searches to trace him. Nothing came up. And I got a phone call the next day. It was the chap was from Cardiff. I got a phone call the next day from a bloke I'd never spoken to before, who was the friend of a friend, who said, "Oh, so-and-so said you might be able to help me. Some stuff happened in my childhood which I've never been able to get over, and I was wondering if you could talk me through it." Now, it wasn't the same person, but the bullying, the cruelty was identical, but it was the person who was at the receiving end of it. And I got to help someone get past the behaviour that I had once meted out to someone. So, completing amends, there is a point at which I can't do any more, but then God picks up the baton. It's like a relay race. And those unfinished amends, unfinishable amends, become finishable. But they require me to go to 100,000 AA meetings and put my hand up and talk to lots of improbable people. And connections get made, and gradually things get healed. Here's one. Can you take me through some of your living amends examples from your life or sponsees? And there's something about harm as well. How do I know I've harmed someone? Are you on your own amends list? So let's do the 8 and 9 ones. Can I go off and make amends because I know what I've done and how to fix it, even without writing inventory or talking with my sponsor? How do you make amends to your exes? Is it, interesting wording, is it okay not to do step 9? Let's do that one first. Of course it's okay. You know, you can still come to the meeting. You can still come for dinner afterwards. But the consequences of not doing step 9 are your consequences. If I say it's okay, it won't take away the consequences for you of not doing your step 9. And this is a really important principle in sponsorship. So I'm not the easiest person to have as a sponsor, as at least one person in the room can attest to. I'm cranky. And I give lots of what we'd call in England 3-line whips to sponsees about things they absolutely must do. And sometimes people phone up and say, can I miss my home group tonight? This is happening or that's happening. And they want me to give them permission. And then, of course I can give permission, but you'll have consequences. If you keep missing it, you're going to call in 6 weeks' time saying you don't feel as though you belong in the group anymore. So you can do whatever you want, but the consequences are yours. I'm not here to give you permission to do anything or not do anything. How do you know if someone has been harmed? There's a really quick way. You put yourself in their shoes and you ask yourself how you would have liked it. And if you wouldn't have liked it, then there's probably a conversation there. There's a lot more that can be said about that. There are 100,000 situations, but the basic forms of harm, I'll probably miss one or two off. There's damage to property, there's stealing people's money, there's upsetting people emotionally, that's 3. There's taking people's time, there's being a nuisance, there's intruding on people, so breaching boundaries. And then there are deeper ones. There are problems where a crossword or a moment of cruelty will rupture a relationship, and the relationship stays ruptured for years. And the harm is not the actual moment of the crossword. The harm is the break in that relationship for years. Or when you set people against each other. When you brief against person A to person B. And I've been at the receiving end of that sometimes, and how I can understand harm is because I've been at the receiving end of harm. And then other forms of harm even deeper than that. It's where I've misled people spiritually. So I've been militant in AA in a very unattractive way, and it's led, you lead people down the wrong path by doing that, by the example that you set. Doing things for people that they can do for themselves, that one of the great Al-Anon slips. Keeping people as infants by just running and saving them and rescuing them every time something goes wrong, when there is something they could be doing themselves, which is stopping them from spiritually growing. There are all sorts of different forms of harm, but they all, for me, boil down to how would I like to have been at the receiving end, and did it cause a problem in the relationship? What would they say about you now? And it usually starts to become pretty clear. The only difficulty, if any of you grew up in a household affected by alcoholism, I grew up in a household affected by alcoholism, your guiltometer might be broken. Which means my sense of guilt was skewy. So I would feel guilty about things that I had no business feeling guilty about. So when I legitimately said no to something, for whatever reason, for exhaustion, because it wasn't appropriate, because it was a crazy request, when I legitimately said no, I would feel guilty because the other person would use their anger as a manipulative tool to get me to acquiesce. And that kind of craziness is not an Al-Anon talk, but that kind of craziness meant that my guilt is not always the best guide. And also, I had the ability to justify very bad behaviour and temporarily suppress my guilt for it. So guilt is an indication that I might have done something wrong. An absence of guilt is not a sign that I'm guilt-free. It's just, if there's any sense of uneasiness, I write a step 8 on it. And when I write step 8, I write out 3 things. What action I took, what I should have done instead, how the other person was negatively affected by it. The hardest work I do with sponsees is the hardest work my sponsor did with me, which is to get to the bottom of what actually happened. Because the whole alcoholic household, or crazy household, that the dynamic of that is the sense of where you stop and the other person begins, where your insides stop and where your outsides start, all gets totally blurred, because everyone starts to feel responsible for everyone else. So I'm not responsible for me, because everything is your fault, or I haven't got time to be responsible for me because you're leaving things in such a mess. If I didn't clean up after you, who would? If I didn't do the service, it won't get done, so that's why I'm exhausted. So that's why I don't have time for me. That kind of boundary blurring. It can mean that the step 8 is a real mess. And I remember someone many years ago, they wrote on the step 8 first column, what did you do wrong? I created an atmosphere. I'm like, what, with a chemistry set? What? I want to know what you actually did. And I don't know what it actually was, whether it was scowling or sighing or criticism or, it could be 1,000 different things, but we want to make it concrete. What was the actual behaviour? And what would a healthy person have done in that situation? And it's that comparison that is the real test of whether I owe an amend. It's not just, sometimes people are going to be upset by stuff, and I am going to need to apologise or smooth the waters or express goodwill or show kindness or whatever. But I can't always apologise. If what I did wasn't wrong, I can't always apologise. Because I can't say that something that is right is wrong. So just because you've upset someone doesn't mean there's an amend, but there might be an apology, there might be a smoothing of the waters. A good example is I'm an examiner in the profession that I practice, and I fail. You have to fail people sometimes because you can't let people who are incompetent be allowed to be qualified in a profession, and they get very upset, and they know who you are. But I don't owe them an amend because they're upset. And my sponsor has, in inverted commas, upset me because I didn't like what he had to say. But he doesn't owe me an amend because I'm upset. What he owes me is, he doesn't owe me anything, but what I owe as a sponsee to other people is I owe kindness and politeness in how I deliver things. But step 8 is about finding out what is right, not necessarily what is nice. I don't have to be nice, I have to act right. And sometimes there's a difference between the two. Are you on your amends list? No. Because, for me, steps 8 and 9 are about re-establishing my relationships with other people. Of course, I harmed myself throughout my drinking and in my sobriety, but so does everyone. The best way I can make amends to myself is to forgive everyone for everything, to make amends to everyone for everything I've done wrong, and to throw myself 100% into serving my higher power. If I want to really make amends to myself, that's how I do it. But that's already covered. I've already signed up for the process which will make amends to me. So I haven't needed to separately make amends to myself. It's totally covered by everything else. And with the living amends thing, I'd like to cover just a couple of ways in which I won't make a direct amend. And by direct amend, I mean actively, verbally saying, these are the things I did wrong, I shouldn't have done them, I regret doing them, I understand this probably caused some harm, it probably caused some hurt. I really want to make things right. Is there anything I can do to help? Is there anything I can do to turn this round? That's the basic amends conversation. There are 3 times I won't have that conversation overtly, or I'll have it in a much more subtle way. The first way is I will not reveal new information. If they already know the thing that I did, then I can't hurt them by apologising for it. The way in which I say it may need to be tactful. Sometimes the situation involved a lot of humiliation on their part. So I want to be specific about referring to the event without humiliating them by explicitly recounting all of the cruel, humiliating things that I said. So be specific but not explicit. Be tactful and considerate in how you approach the person. But if they were there, they know what I did. I can't harm them by bringing up something. I might bring to the surface hidden anger or upset, but I'm not creating new anger or upset by apologising. And a lot of amends will bring up negative emotion, but it's negative emotion that was buried. Maybe the only way that they can heal is for it to be brought to the surface and dispelled by the amends process. But I don't reveal new information. I don't dob anyone else in. And also, one thing that I'm careful of, and so for instance, there was one situation where there was a covert theft, where my father had got me a job. It was a small town, got me a job in a place, and if I'd admitted to that openly, it would have immediately have brought shame in the public perception, or the organisation's perception, on my father for having put me in a situation to enable me to do that in the first place. And I wasn't going to do that to him. He was the mayor of the local town. So I made amends a different way. And looking at what all of the effects of the amends are going to be in a real sense enabled me to basically find very few situations in which I would have to make an indirect amend. But one of them was my mother. For the first 15 years of me being in AA, if you think I seem tense now, boy was I tense in my first 15 years. This is after a lot of work. We're not saints. But in my first 15 years, I was pretty tense with my mother. I hadn't forgiven her. I'd intellectually understood that it wasn't her fault the way she was. But I hadn't... The question the chap asked earlier about letting it go, I hadn't let it go. Every time I was with her, it resuscitated the old emotions. So the forgiveness was partial. And the harm that I did to her was that I learned in AA how to be a good boy, how to behave well, how to scrub up, how to show up for my mother, how to do all the right things, to help around the house, keep my nose clean, do what needed to be done. But my heart wasn't in it. I didn't want to be there. And she knew it. Of course she knew it. She's my mother. And she would covertly accuse me, well, actually not so covertly. She'd accuse me of not loving her, saying, you don't want to be here, you're just doing it out of duty. And you're between the devil and the deep blue sea. If you deny it, you're being fraudulent. If you admit it, it becomes a stone in her stomach she can't begin to digest. So what are you going to do? If I'd said to her, yeah, been faking it for the last 15 years. So sorry about that. What can I do? I mean, you cannot have that conversation. So it needed to be done a different way. I mean, the step 8 and 9 process, I said to my higher power, I've harmed this person by being fraudulent. I behaved well, but there's been a fraudulent aspect to it because my insides did not match my outsides, and it totally shows when that's the case. We're not as good actors as we think. And my higher power enabled something to happen which I couldn't have brought about myself, which basically I softened towards her. I saw the frail, she was 80 at the time, the frail old woman in front of me. And I started to see her, as the book says, from an entirely different angle. I started to see her life from her angle, and that's where the real forgiveness began. And her constant attacks of me were not about me. They were about her guilt for her own stuff, which she needed to project out onto me so that she could feel safe for a few minutes. And as soon as I went, the guilt would land back on her. I was the means of her getting relief from her guilt. It was not about me, it was about her. And that was a gift from my higher power, by me going to my higher power saying, I have no idea, zero idea how to make amends here. You're just going to have to show me because I'm out of ideas. And over the last 10 years, I built a relationship with her to the point she was in hospital a lot earlier this year. She has 1,000 things wrong with her. She's 90. We've moved her into a care home. She was in a delirious state when we moved her in there. She's gradually recovered from that and discovered she's in a care home. It's not the easiest set of conversations to have. You know, sweetheart, you're not going to go back to the old place you were living. This is going to be your home now. We're going to visit you every day. We're going to look after you. We're going to do whatever you need. We're going to do it. We can run all of your affairs for you. We can take care of all the finances. And it takes a huge amount of time out of my schedule every week to do all the things that need to be done. But I go and see her, and I want to be with her. And it makes no sense. She's not someone I would have chosen. But when I'm there, I want to be there. That is the amend. But I didn't do that. I didn't make myself that. You can't pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You can't stand in a bucket, hold the handles and lift yourself up into the air. I couldn't make myself become that person. All I could do was create the conditions in which that could take place. And those conditions needed to be created internally and externally. I created the external conditions in my first 15 years. It's taken the last 10, 11 years to create the internal conditions for God to turn the switch inside me to enable that to happen. Does anyone have any other questions on steps 8 or 9? Or indeed any other questions at all? Yes?
There's a line in the big book which reads that when the spirituality is overcome, you straighten out mentally and physically.
Yeah.
I was wondering what your experience of that is.
Okay, I can, yes, that's a helpful question. So, the line is on page 64. Let's just get the line out. Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. This answer might be slightly out there, so forgive me. If it makes sense and helps, that's wonderful. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. I think at the base of all of my resentment is a resentment against God. I had a sponsee many years ago who was suffering greatly. Someone had been sober a long time, but was very, very angry and had never processed it. And this person said one day, as her sponsor, I was her sponsor, she said, do you like me? Now, it was a difficult situation because we had a difficult relationship, so it wasn't going to be a straightforward answer. She resisted a lot, and I've mellowed a lot since then. I wasn't so mellow at the time. And I said, as an AA sponsor, I love you, but in the same way that I would any other sponsee in AA. And she said, yeah, but do you like me? It doesn't mean anything that you're giving this love or this time to everyone else. If there's nothing about me which is attracting that, then it doesn't mean anything. And boy, did I get that. I understood that. Clancy, God bless him, says, if you made me feel special, I felt okay. If you treated me okay, I felt terrible. And what I wanted from God was specialness. Being one of a gazillion living creatures on the planet, loved equally by God, along with all these other ones, not good enough for me. That might be good enough for you. I used to go to a 12 and 12 meeting, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions meeting. There were no big book meetings when I got sober. It was all 12 and 12 meetings for the steps. And there's a line in there in step 12 where it says, a worker amongst workers. And it made my face curl. What a repulsive and tedious, if I'm just going to be a worker among workers, what's the point? So God's love for the entire universe, and God saying, you can be part of this universe, you can be completely fused with it, you can be part of the everything, not good enough for me. I wanted a little space carved out just for me where I was special. And then I run through the physical universe looking for opportunities to be special. The chief amongst which is those little intimate relationships where I love you and I love you too and I'll be with you forever. And this thing where the other person, that line from the Sondheim song, all afternoon doing every little chore, the thought of you stays bright. That desperate search for specialness was a reaction to God saying, I'm not going to give you specialness. I love you, but I love everyone else as well, which is what I said to that sponsee. I'd never made the connection between those two things until I was thinking about the answer to this question. So when it says resentment is the number one offender, that is the resentment which is the number one offender. The point at which I leave this connectedness. And I was connected as a child. When I see the pictures of me when I was 3 or 4, I was connected. There was a brightness in the eyes then. You look at pictures of me when I was 8 or 9, gone. So when it says restored to sanity, that's the sanity I get restored to, being one with God. And when that is sorted out, everything else flows automatically. And the reason why, I think there are only 2 ways of looking at the universe. The first one is the one I described earlier, of being in competition with the rest of the universe for limited resources, for limited specialness, for a limited place in the sun. where I'm in competition with other people, and occasionally there are alliances, there are exchanges, and those special relationships, those special intimate relationships, where I give you my worthlessness and you give me your wondrousness, and somehow this is a deal which is going to work out for me and for you. But you mustn't ever find out that what I'm giving you is damaged goods. So we have to conceal that, and I have to conceal from you my guilt that I've given you something worthless and holding it out to be worthy of the greatness you've given me. That whole system of living in the material world, trying to get the material world to give me money, sex, power, prestige, comfort, thrills, and appearance, rearranging all of my external circumstances so that there's a pop and I finally, suddenly feel okay. That line on 61 where it says, wasn't he a victim of the delusion that he could wrest happiness and satisfaction from this world if he only managed well? In other words, if I can rearrange my life, if I can get everyone to behave correctly, I'm going to be okay. That's starting from the material and hoping that I'm going to get a mental and a spiritual experience by getting the material right. And it's upside down thinking. It's going from the material to the mental to the spiritual. If I get all of these things, I will eventually feel connected. And it's backwards and it's upside down, but it's the way the whole world, with very few exceptions, thinks. And AA gives me a completely different way of looking at things. It says, get your connection with the higher power sorted out first. Which is why it steps first, tradition second, concepts third. Get your relationship with the higher power sorted out first. And then you can start to get your relationships with your brothers and sisters. It talks in the book about, on page 28, we're all children of a living creator. P.S. I'm not a Christian, but I do believe that we are spirit and that we are born of spirit and God is spirit. So we are emanations of that. Projecting out into the material realm through the physical body. But I'm not the physical body. The physical body is just my communication device for right now. That's it. If I get the top level right, the spiritual level right, at the mental level, I get to choose between the ego and God. And AA gave me that choice back. It put me back in the decision-making room where I could look in steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 and say, that whole deal the ego was selling me, which is that if I behave myself in the world will give me all of its riches, both material and other riches, and I'll be all right. That deal does not work. I'm going to choose again. But it was AA which gave me the ability to choose again and choose against the ego and choose for God. And that's the mental level. Once the mental level is sorted out, the higher power can guide me. And of course, you can't consciously make every decision. Almost every decision one has to make during the course of the day has to be automatic and instinctive. So I need to... The car has got to move. The car has got to be in gear. Either it's in reverse, so I put the gear into the ego and I go backwards, or I put the car into first and second and third, and I start moving forward. But I don't move in any direction unless I engage one of those two systems, the ego system or the God system, reverse or drive. And so everything that then happens in the material realm flows from that basic decision. Am I going to be, as it says in the 12 and 12, do I want to be America's #1 man? Which is, he says, every boy wants to be the president. Every girl has more sense. I don't know why he doesn't mention girls at that point. If I choose the ego's voice, everything else goes automatically from that, because I'm in a complete logical but insane system which runs by its own logic, runs by the rules of guilt and fear and shame and anger and grievance. Or I go into first gear, second gear, third gear, I go into drive, I'm choosing God, I can go forward. And again, everything flows automatically. I don't know how many of you sponsor other people? Have you noticed when you're just totally chilled, they can throw whatever they want at you. You're placid, it's fine. Whatever you say gets through to them. They calm down during the course of the conversation. They say at the end of it was really helpful. And then you have another day, you've got a head on you. The phone rings, and sometimes people say, you always answer a call from a sponsee. I don't. Because if my head is not on straight when I answer the phone, everything I say can be technically right, but the spirit is wrong, and they're in a worse state at the end. I found a way by saying the right thing and somehow deepen the person's guilt, which is their fundamental problem in the first place. So there are only two systems. I get to go back to the decision-making room in my mind and choose between the two. But it's the connection with the spirit which enables me to do that. I need to be reminded of God first. So spirit first, mind second, physical reality third. And if you want a really good example of that, I was ill 100 times in my 20s with repeated inflammatory conditions, throat conditions, liver conditions, all sorts of things. That my psychic state got reflected in my physical form again and again and again. And the more my spirit got cleared up, the more my body... I mean, there are obviously physical things you can't do anything about. I'm not going to go crazy about this. But there's a really strong correlation. I can see how fixing the body alone will not fix me if I'm ill. I need to make sure my spirit is healed as well. Let's have another break. But let's have a quick serenity prayer first. So, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know